It's the end of the world as we know it. Again, because as you may have already astutely noted, this is a part 2 to perhaps one of the most difficult to tie down subgenres of horror fiction, where life, the planet and all civilization as we know it comes to its untimely end, either by means of the sun scorching our planet in a blaze of hellfire, mutually assured nuclear destruction, a vile pandemic spreading its way across the population, or a bizarre mix of all of the above. Apocalyptic horror is an important one though. It holds a mirror to the fallacy of our own society, and it's perhaps the ultimate definition of a cautionary tale, because as the picture is so often painted, it's pretty difficult to come back from the end of the world. Hello horror fans, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, top 5 scary videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host Jack Finch, as today we curiously take a look at the top 5 scariest apocalyptic horror movies. Part 2. Roll the clip. For the curious amongst you, that scene was from Lars von Trier's art house visual extravaganza 2011's Melancholia, which for those of you that have already managed to see is far removed from ever being a horror film, but the final few moments are very much the end of the world. It leads us to an interesting point, because as I briefly mentioned, apocalyptic horror is a hard one to pin down, but in this part 2 we'll be loosening the parameters just a tad to further scour the cinematic landscape. Let's jump into it, shall we? Kicking off at number 5, The Divide, 2011. Okay. I ummed and ahed about putting this film on our list because, for the most part, 2011's The Divide is not a great horror film at all. From a narrative perspective, it's hard for an audience to ever truly get into the plight of its surviving characters, and in terms of actual horror content, this one is hard to stomach. This film is bleak, and its violence isn't entirely necessary. It's nihilistic in the sense that this film was created with the intention of painting the most painful, repulsive picture of humanity clinging onto hope, but unlike the familiar premise of 2009's The Road, it misses the mark far too late, and ultimately it's hard to find the motivation to root for anything in this film. But as you may have guessed, therein lies the point. If you want to imagine how grotesque the end of the world could be, then 2011's The Divide is a horror experience that fits that particular shopping list. Written by Aaron Shea and Carl Mueller, The Divide comes from the mind of Xavier Gens, the man responsible for the fantastic 2007 new French extremity film Frontières, and if you're familiar with that particular film, it may give you some kind of idea to the level of gore and nihilistic violence that takes place in The Divide. It tells a tale of a group of survivors that take shelter in the basement of their apartment complex after New York City has been ravaged by nuclear explosions. As resources begin to dwindle and tensions get frayed in the classic manner, the group descends into a whole new kind of hell as they each try to carve their dominance whilst clambering on to the basest of our human instincts. You see, this film won't make you feel optimistic about the end of the world, but perhaps that's exactly what you're looking for. Like I said, go into this film with the prior knowledge that its intention is to repulse you, and maybe you'll find something worthwhile for a horror fan. But yeah, don't say I didn't warn you. Swinging in at number 4, Pulse, 2001. And this film in particular has already been featured in our top 5 scariest Japanese horror movies list, but still, the fact remains the same that it deserves its place and recognition as one of the greatest apocalyptic horror movies of the decade 2000, although you actually may not realise it until the bitter end. You see, it's hard to place this film on our list without giving some semblance of spoilers, but from the off, 2001's Pulse, otherwise known as Cairo, is a fantastic horror film in the truest sense of the word, so I guess being apocalyptic is 2 for 1. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Also, about those spoilers, just maybe take my word for it, hopefully. Written and directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa, Pulse is an incredibly specific premise from the off. The film itself starts off small and then gradually meanders its way to a much more expansive scale. It manages to sink its teeth into 2 complementary narratives that we as an audience are gradually given light to, that tells the tale of a modern day Japan where the internet seems to be seeping through to our reality and giving way to a host of paranormal entities, ghosts that seemingly want to spread their undeath to everyone with access to a computer. and everyone else. Now, I kind of don't want to say any more because Pulse is a must-see for any horror fan, apocalyptic or otherwise, but just trust me, the final act of this film ties everything together in a way that only Japanese horror cinema can do. Next up at number 3, Miracle Mile, 1988.
And the guy, he just started yelling, Dad, it's happening. The big one, we're locked in. Thor Arthur 66 DDZ.
Wait a minute.
Because I, for one, think that this Part 2 apocalyptic list needs a grand old dose of in media res, and it puts us right inside the phone booth with none other than 1988's Miracle Mile. Now, this film is fantastic, but it may perturb a few of you horror fans with its inclusion on this list, particularly at the number 3 spot. But I say to hell with that, there's 70 minutes to the end of the world, and what are you going to do about it? Because Miracle Mile is perhaps one of the most unique interpretations of the Earth's apocalypse as one of the truest to its form, and it's safe to say there hasn't been a film quite like it ever since it graced the silver screen back in the late 80s, an equally tumultuous time where everyone still felt a little hot under the collar when it came to mutually assured destruction. Written and directed by Steve DeJarnat, Miracle Mile is unique in its approach in the sense that it takes place in a continuous moment, mostly in real time, depicting the late evening and early morning of downtown Los Angeles, where unbeknownst to the vast majority of the population, a nuclear launch has been activated and that bright red rocket is heading straight toward them. But a few of them do, particularly our guy Harry, played by Anthony Edwards, who receives a phone call in a disused phone box from a frantic soldier screaming about the end of the world, who tells him that there's less than 70 minutes before everything turns to ash and rubble. And so sets off a chain of events that is so damn exhilarating that it's difficult to realise just exactly where this film is going to take you. It has the scale and scope and stature of a full-blown guns blazing box office blockbuster, tar pit included, but it's delivered at a very intelligently human level. It's claustrophobic, it chokes you. This script is almost Hitchcockian in its approach. It's like Rear Window meets Deep Impact. It's not a traditional horror film, but as far as thrills and nerve-wracking tension goes, Miracle Mile is one of the best of the best. Next up at number 2, Stakeland, 2010. And to hell with it. The rules are already out the window, so let's firmly plant a blood-soaked stake right at the tip top with 2010's Stakeland. And what makes an apocalyptic horror movie even better? Apocalyptic vampire horror plague. That's what. This film is awesome, and it manages to cram in enough joy for the genre that every horror film should aspire to in some way. In essence, it's a road movie interpretation of Blade with a little pinch of Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later, minus the zombies, with the shaky cam horror dial turned up to 11. The thing is, horror as a genre lends us so many possibilities to how the fictional world could end, and as it seems, perhaps the most horrifyingly efficient ending would be bloodthirsty vampires, because unless you've got Mister driving you throughout the wasteland, we'd all pretty much be screwed. Directed by Jim Mickle and written by himself and Nick D'Amici, who also takes the lead in this film as the awesome and mysterious figure known only as Mr. Stakeland may seem a little goofy or over the top on the surface, but please don't judge a book by its cover, because this film is utterly awesome. It tells a tale of an apocalyptic United States after the vast majority of the population has been wiped out by a plague of vampirism, and small pockets of survivors cling together out in the wild, hidden away from entire cities infested by vampires. This film doesn't break any rules, and it's not going to rock the boat when it comes to cerebral horror filmmaking, but for fans of blood, guts, the end of the world, and bad stake slingers roaming the wasteland, there is nothing quite like Stakeland. Give it a watch. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, Threads, 1984. Of course, because although again this film has been featured several times on previous lists, when it comes to the scariest, starkest, most realistic depiction of the collapse and ultimate demise of civilization, few films hold a candle to 1984's Threads. And for those of you that have already seen it, you'll know that this particularly human horror flick will truly leave its mark on you. Produced by the BBC back in 1984, Threads was shot on a limited budget and was perhaps the first film of its kind to ever fictionally portray the bleak despair that would come with the fallout of of a nuclear winter and the subsequent toll that it would take on our society at every level. Written by Barry Hines and directed by Mick Jackson, Threads pulls no punches when it comes to the socio-political debate between nuclear armament. It never once distances us as a viewer to the horrors that would be unleashed if that big red button was pressed, and because of that it holds eternally as a stark warning sign. I can't really say much more about Threads truly, because it's a film that needs to be witnessed independently, seen through your own bloodshot eyes, just as the survivors of this film stare gaunt and gazed at the rubble and societal horror that surrounds them. Threads is an important film and will continue to be an important film, held up as the truest horror any of us could ever imagine. Although The Road took the top spot on our previous list, this film stands hand in hand with how utterly bleak and devastating it is. Yeah, and now I'm kinda sad. If you're in the mood for real close to the bone apocalyptic horror, watch Threads. Then see how you feel. Well, there we have it, horror fans, our list for the top 5 scariest apocalyptic horror movies, part 2. What do you guys think? Do you agree? Think we can add any more to this particular series? Then please let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below, as well as any choice picks of your own. Before we depart from today's video though, let's first take a quick look at some of your more resounding remarks over the past few days. First up, Hamish Morgan says, I would love to sit down and watch these amazing horror films with Jack and Lucy. I think it would be an awesome horror movie night. Hell yeah, Hamish. Maybe we'll try and sort out some kind of drive-in YouTube movie theatre or something like that. I don't know. That'd be dope. Although things are so much scarier when you're not in a large group, don't you think? I remember watching Paranormal Activity 3 at the theatre and the whole audience were just laughing all the way through. Or maybe that's just because that film was hilarious. I don't know. Well, on that note, unfortunately that's all we've got time for in today's video. Just stick around all the way until the end. If you were a fan of this video, or just top 5 scary videos in particular, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell. And I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host, Jack Finch. You've been watching top 5 scary videos. Until next time, take it easy.